My name is Marcus Reynolds. I'm 35, a retired Army Ranger, and, well, I guess you could say a bit of a mess. Life hasn't exactly been kind since I came back from the war. PTSD is what the doctors call it, but it feels like living with a ghost that won't let you sleep. The meds help, but not enough. Nights are the hardest. That's when the memories creep in, uninvited and unforgiving. That's why I'm here, in the middle of the northern Minnesota wilderness. I bought an old RV, packed it with supplies, and hit the road. Just me in the quiet. No one to talk to, no noise to remind me of what I left behind. The idea was to find some peace, maybe a little clarity. But as I'm about to find out, peace is a luxury you don't always get. I found this spot deep in the forest. Its perfecter, at least, it seemed that way. A small clearing surrounded by towering pines, a frozen lake just a short hike away, and no cell service for miles. The first day went well. I parked the RV, got a fire going, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. For the first time in a while, I felt okay. By the second day, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything big at first, just little things, like how quiet it was. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. The air felt heavier too, like it was pressing down on me. Then I found the deer carcass. It was half-eaten, lying just beyond the clearing. Something big had gotten to it big enough to tear through muscle and bone like paper. The strangest part was that the bite marks didn't look like anything I'd seen before. They weren't sharp like a wolf's or clean like a bear's. They were messy, almost human. That night I built the fire bigger than usual. I told myself it was just to stay warm, but the truth is I felt exposed, vulnerable. The kind of feeling you don't ignore, especially out here. Then came the voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A soft, distant call, barely louder than the wind. Marcus. It sounded just like Hermie's wife, Emma, but it couldn't be her. Emma's been gone for 2 years. I stood there, frozen, listening. Marcus, come here. The voice was clearer now, closer. My stomach dropped. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. I didn't sleep much that night. By the time dawn broke, my hands were still shaking. Something wasn't right here, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. When the sun came up, it didn't feel like morning. The light barely broke through the thick trees, leaving long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. I stepped outside the RV, hoping fresh air would help clear my head. The fire pit was a pile of ash, and the smell of burnt wood lingered. For a moment, I thought maybe last night was just my imagination, but then I saw the footprints. They were faint in the dirt, circling the RV like someone or something had been watching me. The strange part was the shape. They weren't boots or sneakers, and they definitely weren't animal tracks. They were long, with deep grooves, like claws had dug into the ground. Calm down, Marcus, I muttered to myself. It's probably just a bear. A bear I could handle. But this didn't feel like a bear. I grabbed my rifle and decided to take a walk around the clearing. I needed to figure out what was out here with me. As I moved through the trees, I noticed how still everything was. No birds, no wind, just silence. My boots crunched over frozen ground, each step sounding louder than it should. Then I found the second carcass. This time it wasn't a deer. It was smaller, a fox or maybe a coyote. Its body was torn open, ribs sticking out like broken branches. What caught my eye wasn't just the blood or the way it looked like it had been mauled. It was the teeth. Scattered around the body were small, white teeth, some bloody, some clean. But they weren't animal teeth. They were human. I felt my stomach turn. This wasn't normal. I'd seen some pretty gruesome stuff in my time, but this was something else. I backed away and headed for the RV. I needed to regroup, think things through. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, I could feel it, like a weight on my back. I turned around a few times, scanning the trees, but nothing was there, just shadows. When I reached the RV, the temperature dropped so fast it felt like someone flipped a switch. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and the metal door handle burned my hand like ice when I touched it. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to tell myself it was just a cold front, but deep down I knew better. I cranked up the heater and sat at the small table, rifle by my side. And that's when the voice came back. Marcus. It was faint, almost like a whisper. I froze, listening. Marcus, please. It sounded closer now. Desperate, like someone begging for help. I grabbed the rifle and peeked out the small window. The clearing was empty, just snow and trees. Marcus, come outside. My heart was pounding. It wasn't Emma. It couldn't be, but it sounded just like her. The same soft tone, the same way she used to call my name. I stayed inside, gripping the rifle so hard my knuckles turned white. The voice kept calling for a while, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. I stayed up all night, staring at the door, waiting for whatever was out there to show itself. When morning came, there were more footprints around the RV. This time they led away into the trees, and scattered on the ground near the door were more teeth. Human teeth. By the time the third day rolled around, I knew I couldn't stay put. Whatever was out there wasn't going to leave me alone. I packed my gear rifle, flashlight, a knife, and some food and decided to follow the tracks leading away from the RV. The forest felt different that morning. The air was so cold it stung my lungs, and the trees seemed taller, closer, like they were leaning in to watch. I walked slowly, keeping my rifle ready and my eyes sharp. Every crunch of snow beneath my boots made my nerves jump. The tracks were easy to follow, clear and deep. They led me through the thickest parts of the forest, past fallen logs and frozen streams. As I walked, I noticed strange things. A tree with deep claw marks running down its trunk. Piles of stones arranged in odd shapes, like someone had built them on purpose. And the smell faint but foul, like rotting meat. After what felt like hours, I came to a small hill. At its base was a dark opening. A cave. The tracks disappeared inside. I stood there for a moment, staring into the blackness, my breath clouding in front of me. Every instinct I had screamed to turn back, to leave this place and never return, but I couldn't. Not without answers. I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was stronger now, a mix of decay and something sweet, like old blood. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, showing rough stone walls that glistened with ice. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Bones littered the ground animal at first, but then human. Skulls, ribs, femurs, all scattered like someone had tossed them aside. Some of them were old, brittle, and yellowed, but others looked fresh. Then I saw the bodies. They were hanging from the ceiling, tied up with ropes made of, I don't even know. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before. The bodies were frozen, their skin stretched tight over their bones, their faces locked in expressions of terror. In the middle of the cave, on a flat rock, was a journal. It was old, its leather cover cracked and stained. I picked it up carefully, flipping through the pages. The handwriting was messy, frantic. It told the story of someone else who had been trapped out here, hunted by a creature that wasn't human. The word Wendigo kept coming up, over and over again, underlined and circled. The last entry sent a chill through me. It mimics, it waits, it feeds. If you hear their voice, it's already too late. I snapped the journal shut and shoved it into my bag. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I heard something a soft rustling from deeper in the cave. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was coming for me. I didn't stop running until I was back at the RV. By then, the sun was low, painting the forest in deep orange and long shadows. My breath came in sharp gasps, and my legs felt like they'd give out. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then checked every window, making sure nothing could get inside. My hands were shaking as I dropped my bag on the table. I pulled out the journal and flipped through it again. The words stared back at me, almost taunting. It mimics. It waits. It feeds. The forest outside was quiet, too quiet, like everything had gone still to watch what would happen next. I grabbed my rifle and sat near the door, my eyes scanning every shadow outside. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just movementa flicker of something between the trees. Then it stepped closer, into the edge of the clearing. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a thin, bony frame that didn't seem natural. Its skin was grayish and stretched tight over its body, and its head had antlers. They weren't like a deer's, though. They looked like they were made of bone, jagged and sharp. I froze, gripping the rifle. The creature didn't move, just stood there, watching. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers, and its breath came out in slow, white clouds. Then it bent down and placed something on the ground. I squinted, trying to see. It was a rabbit, skinned and bloody, laid carefully in the snow like a gift. My stomach turned. I'd seen animals do things like this in the wild, leaving prey for something stronger. But this wasn't an animal. This was different. The creature straightened up, tilting its head like it was waiting for me to come outside. My grip on the rifle tightened, but I didn't move. Slowly, it backed away into the trees, disappearing into the shadow. I locked the door again and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. It was playing with me, testing. Hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest in darkness. I turned on the RV's lights, hoping they'd keep whatever it was away. That's when I heard the scratch. It started soft, like nails dragging across metal. Then it grew louder, more frantic, like something trying to claw its way inside. I grabbed my rifle and aimed it at the door. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracked. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Then I heard a voice. Marcus opened the door. It sounded like Emma again. Perfect. Too perfect. "Please, Marcus. I'm so cold." I swallowed hard, my finger hovering over the trigger. "You're not her," I whispered. The voice laughed. It wasn't Emma's laugh. It was something else, low and hollow, like the sound of wind echoing through a cave. Then the lights went out. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint moon outside. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. I could feel it out there, circling. The temperature dropped again, so fast I could see frost forming on the windows. My teeth chattered as I tried to think, to come up with a plan. And then I saw Themis crystals, sharp and jagged, crawling under the door like tiny claws. They inched closer, spreading across the floor. I knew I couldn't stay here. If I did, I'd freeze, or worse. This thing wanted me, and it wasn't going to stop. I couldn't stay in the RV. It wasn't safe anymore. The ice creeping under the door was proof of that. My survival instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my gear, the rifle, a knife, the flashlight, and my last grenade. If I was going down, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. The moment I opened the door, the cold hit me like a punch. It was bone deep, the kind of cold that made it hard to breathe. The forest was pitch black, but I could feel it watching me. The air was so still, so heavy. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept moving. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, bouncing off the snow and trees. My footsteps crunched loudly, the sound echoing around me. Every few steps I stopped to listen. But there was nothing. No birds, no wind, no sound except my own breathing. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, like an animal, but deeper, almost human. My blood ran cold. I turned the flashlight in the direction of the sound, and there it was. The creature stepped out from the trees, moving slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Its body was tall and impossibly thin, its antlers scraping the branches above. its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I felt like it could see straight through me. It opened its mouth, and a blast of icy air shot out, hitting me square in the chest. I stumbled back, gasping. My rifle was heavy in my hands, but I raised it and fired. The bullet hit, but it didn't do what I expected. Instead of piercing its skin, the bullet froze mid-air, then shattered into tiny shards of ice. My heart sank. This thing wasn't just a predator, it was something else. Something I didn't understand. It lunged at me, faster than I thought possible. I barely had time to dive out of the way. Its claws raked the ground where I'd been standing, leaving deep gouges in the frozen earth. I rolled to my feet, gripping the rifle tightly. "Come on," I shouted, more to keep myself focused than anything else. The creature turned to me, its antlers catching the moonlight. It moved slowly now, like it was enjoying the game. I fired again, this time aiming for its legs, but the result was the same. The bullet froze and shattered before it even touched the creature. It roared, the sound shaking the trees, and charged. I barely had time to react. Its claws raked across my side, sending me sprawling into the snow. Pain shot through me, but I didn't let go of the rifle. I knew I wasn't going to win this fight, not the way I wanted to. My mind raced as I pulled the grenade from my pocket. The creature loomed over me, its glowing eyes burning into mine. I pulled the pin. "Not today," I muttered. The explosion was deafening. Heat and light filled the clearing, and I felt myself being thrown backward. The last thing I saw was the creature's body crumpling, its antlers shattering like glass. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, everything was still. My body ached, and the cold felt even sharper, biting into my skin. I tried to move, but every part of me screamed in pain. The grenade had knocked me back into the snow, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. The forest was eerily quiet. No growls, no movement, just silence. I forced myself to sit up, groaning as I felt the gash in my side. Blood soaked through my jacket, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I was still breathing, and that was all that mattered. I turned my head toward where the creature had been. The snow was scorched black, and bits of ice and bone were scattered everywhere. Its antlers were gone, shattered into shards that glinted in the pale moonlight. But the body, it wasn't there. My chest tightened as I scanned the area. The thing was massive, there was no way I wouldn't see it. But the clearing was empty, except for the debris left behind by the explosion. "Where are you?" I muttered under my breath, gripping my rifle. My hands were shaking, whether from the cold or fear, I couldn't tell. I forced myself to stand, leaning against a tree for support. My vision blurred for a moment, but I pushed through it. I needed to get back to the RV, patch myself up, and figure out what to do next. Each step felt heavier than the last as I trudged through the snow. My ears were on high alert, listening for any sound that might tell me the creature was still out there. But the forest remained silent. When I finally reached the RV, I collapsed against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The lights inside flickered weakly, powered by the generator I'd left running. I crawled inside and locked the door behind me. Sitting at the small table, I pulled off my jacket and inspected the wound on my side. It was deep, but nothing I couldn't handle. I grabbed the first aid kit and began cleaning it, wincing as the antiseptic burned. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe the explosion had done the job. Maybe the creature was gone for good. But then I saw it. Frost began to creep along the edges of the windows, forming intricate patterns that spread like veins. My breath hitched as the temperature inside the RV plummeted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt that familiar weight again, the feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the small space. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air was heavier, and then I heard Marcus. It was my voice this time, low and raspy, coming from outside the RV. My blood turned to ice. "Marcus, you can't run." I clenched my jaw, gripping the rifle with shaking hands. This thing wasn't just hunting meat, was toying with me. The frost on the windows thickened, and I could see my reflection staring back at me. But something wasn't right. My reflection wasn't holding a rifle, it was smiling. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and then the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. I was left in complete darkness, with only the sound of my own breathing and the faint, chilling whisper of my name. The darkness was suffocating. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I could feel the cold wrapping around me, tightening like a vice. The whispers outside grew louder, circling the RV. "Marcus, let me." It sounded like Emma again, her voice soft and pleading. But I knew better now. I gripped the rifle tighter, my knuckles white. The frost-covered windows seemed to pulse, as if something was pressing against them from the outside. I forced myself to think. I couldn't stay here. The RV was a trap, and that thing outside knew it. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, giving me just enough light to grab my bag and sling it over my shoulder. Then I heard a loud crack. The roof of the RV groaned, and I felt the whole vehicle shudder. Something heavy had landed on top. My chest tightened as I aimed the flashlight upward, the beam trembling along with my hand. Another crack. The metal roof buckled inward, and a claw tore through, ripping a jagged hole above me. Snow and freezing air poured inside as the creature's glowing eyes appeared through the opening. Its antlers scraped the edges, and its mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. I didn't think I just acted. I raised the rifle and fired. The shot rang out in the small space, deafening me, but the bullet froze mid-air again and shattered. The creature roared, the sound shaking the RV, and lunged. I threw myself to the side as its claw tore through the table where I'd just been sitting. Wood and metal splintered, flying in all directions. I scrambled toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature dropped through the hole in the roof, its massive frame bending unnaturally as it squeezed inside. It was even bigger up close, its skin stretched tight over sharp, jutting bones. I threw open the door and stumbled out into the snow. The cold hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I ran, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I tried to put as much distance between me and the RV as possible. Behind me, I heard the sound of metal tearing apart. The creature was ripping through the RV like it was made of paper. My breath came in gasps, each one clouding in the freezing air. I reached the edge of the clearing and ducked behind a fallen tree. My mind raced. The rifle was useless, and I only had one grenade left. If I didn't think of something fast, I was done for. The forest was silent again, but I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. I pulled the grenade from my bag, my hand shaking as I turned it over. This was my last chance. If I timed it right, I might be able to take it down with me. The snow crunched softly behind me. I froze, my heart hammering. Slowly, I turned my head. It was there, standing just a few feet away. Its glowing eyes burned into mine, and its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The creature exhaled, and the freezing air hit me like a slap, stealing the breath from my lungs. I gritted my teeth, clutching the grenade. "Come on," I whispered. It lunged, and I pulled the pin. The explosion lit up the forest, a deafening roar that sent a shockwave through the trees. Heat and light swallowed everything, and for a moment, there was nothing but chaos. Then silence. My name is Dr. Rebecca Hayes, and I study wildlife. Not the cute kind you see in picture books, but the real, raw world of animals in their natural habitats. Right now, I'm parked in the middle of the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, living out of my research RV. It's not exactly cozy, but it's home for now. I'm here because something strange is happening. Wolves, or at least what I thought were wolves, are moving in ways that don't make sense. They're traveling in odd patterns, showing up where they shouldn't be. I've tracked animals for years, but this is different. The first week was pretty quiet. I set up motion cameras around my RV, hoping to catch footage of the wolves. At night, The forest came alive with sound shoals, rustling leaves, and sometimes something heavier moving through the trees. It was eerie, but I told myself it was just my imagination. On the third night, the cameras picked up something. When I checked the footage, my stomach twisted. What I saw wasn't normal. Wolves don't walk on two legs, but these creatures did. They were tall, with long, muscular limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce right through the camera. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a glitch in the camera. But deep down, I knew better. These weren't regular wolves. The next morning, I found something outside my RV. A pile of animal organ charts, livers, and other pieces I couldn't even identify arranged in a perfect circle. It wasn't random. Someone, or something, had done this on purpose. I wanted to leave right then, but my curiosity got the better of me. This was why I became a scientisto, understand the unknown. I told myself it was just a warning from a territorial predator, nothing more. But then the signs became more aggressive. Bloody symbols appeared on the trees around my RV. They looked like claw marks, but they were too precise, almost like writing. And then, on the fifth night, I found him, a local hunter I'd met a few days earlier, torn in half and left on my doorstep. His lifeless eyes stared up at me, and his blood soaked the ground beneath him. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. This wasn't just a warning anymore. Whatever these creatures were, they wanted me to know I was next. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the wind outside, sent chills down my spine. I kept the lights off and sat by the window, clutching my flashlight like it could somehow protect me. By morning, I forced myself to step outside. The hunter's body was still there, a gruesome reminder that whatever was out here wasn't just dangerous, it was deliberate. I called the authorities, but out here in the mountains, help doesn't come quickly. They said they'd send someone, but I knew it could take hours. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I threw myself into my work. I checked the motion cameras again. The footage from the night before made my skin crawl. The creatures were back, and this time, they were closer. One of them stood just a few feet from the RV, staring directly at the camera. Its body was massive, its shoulders hunched like a predator ready to pounce. But it wasn't the size that scared me, it was the way it moved. Slow, calculated, like it knew exactly what it was doing. I rewound the footage and watched again, hoping I'd see something that made it all make sense. Maybe it was a bear with a deformity, maybe a prank by locals. But the more I watched, the less I could deny it. These weren't animals, at least not entirely. Later that day, I found another message. This time, it wasn't just animal organs. There was blood smeared across the side of my RV, thick and dripping. It formed a shape 3 claw marks slashed through a circle. It wasn't random. It was a symbol, a warning. The air felt heavier as the sun started to set. I locked every door and window, double-checking every latch. I even moved my desk in front of the door, though I knew it wouldn't stop whatever was out there. That night, they came closer. I could hear them outside, their heavy footsteps crunching the leaves. They didn't howl like wolves. They growled, low and guttural, like they were speaking to each other in a language I couldn't understand. At one point, I swear I heard laughter. Not human laughter, something deeper, rougher, like a growl twisted into a chuckle. The worst part was the silence that followed. For hours, there was nothing. No footsteps, no growls, no wind. Just a suffocating stillness that made every second stretch out like an eternity. Then, just before dawn, I heard Ita's single word, whispered so faintly I almost thought I imagined it. Rebecca. I froze. My name. They knew my name. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside, trembling. The forest around me looked calm, but it felt wrong, like the trees were holding their breath. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see one of them watching me. The blood on the side of my RV had dried, the claw-mark symbol glaring back at me. I wanted answers, but I didn't know where to start. So I did what I do best. I researched. I pulled out my laptop and started digging. I searched for anything about strange wolves or unexplained attacks in the Ozarks. At first, I found nothing, just old legends about shapeshifters and ghost stories meant to scare kids. But then, I stumbled onto something chilling. Over the past decade, several researchers had gone missing in these mountains. Biologists, geologists, even a couple of amateur paranormal investigators. All of them vanished without a trace. The few remains that were found, well, they weren't intact. My heart sank as I read through the reports. Broken bones, bite marks too large to be from any known animal, and bodies left in pieces, almost as if they'd been dissected. I started connecting the dots. These creatures, whatever they were, weren't just animals. They were organized, strategic. They weren't hunting for food. They were hunting people like me. I spent hours combing through old records, piecing together a horrifying picture. There were whispers of a pack, an ancient group of creatures that had lived in these mountains for centuries. Locals called them dogmen. The pack had a hierarchy, just like wolves. At the top was the alpha, a creature so powerful it could walk in daylight. Legend said the alpha was smarter than the rest, almost human in its thinking. The more I read, the more I realized how much danger I was in. These creatures weren't just stalking me, they were studying me, watching how I reacted, testing my limits. That night, the tension hit a new level. The pack surrounded my RV, their growls vibrating through the walls. I could hear them moving, circling, testing the windows and doors. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, low, raspy, and broken, like it had been dragged across shards of glass. "Why are you here?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't possible. Animals don't talk. But this one did. The voice came again, closer this time. "Leave or die." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands shook as I clutched the flashlight, praying the doors would hold. The growls faded after a while, but I knew they weren't gone. They were out there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea what they would do next. The next day, I felt like I was losing my mind. I hadn't slept in what felt like forever, and every noise made me jump. The forest that once felt alive with nature now felt like a trap. I wanted to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. I checked everything: fuel, battery, connections, but it was like something had deliberately sabotaged it. I was stuck. I decided to hike out to one of the motion cameras I'd set up deeper in the woods. Maybe the footage would give me more clues. I carried a small hunting knife, though I knew it wouldn't do much against whatever was out there. The forest was unnervingly quiet as I walked. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I found the camera, but it was smashed to pieces, claw marks raking across the metal casing. That's when I saw it, a trail of footprints. They were huge, like a wolf's, but the spacing was wrong. These weren't paw prints, they were made by something walking upright. The trail led me to a cave hidden behind a cluster of trees. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The cave was dark and smelled like death. I used my flashlight to guide the way, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. And then I saw them, bones, piles of them scattered across the floor. Some were animal, but others were human. Skulls, ribs, femur saw picked clean. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. In the center of the cave, there was a strange arrangement of bones and rocks, almost like a shrine. At the top was something that made my blood run cold, a tattered backpack. It was mine. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I heard the growl. It was low and guttural, coming from the darkness ahead. Slowly, a figure stepped into the beam of light. It was one of Thema Dogman. Its body was massive, covered in matted fur, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. But what struck me most was its face. It wasn't fully animal. There was something disturbingly human in its features. Behind it, more shapes moved. The rest of the pack. They didn't attack, they just watched, their eyes gleaming in the dark. Then the alpha stepped forward. It was taller than the others, its posture almost regal. Its mouth opened, and a sound like grinding stones filled the air. "You are next." The words were broken, forced, but they were clear. My legs felt like jelly as I turned and ran, stumbling out of the cave and back toward the RV. When I reached the RV, the pack was already there, waiting in the shadows. They didn't attack, they didn't need to. They knew I had nowhere to go. That night, they surrounded the RV again, their growls echoing through the walls. The alpha's voice cut through the noise, calm and deliberate. Run or die. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. They were pushing me, testing me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. By the next morning, I was barely holding it together. My hand shook as I tried once again to start the RV, but the engine wouldn't even sputter. The pack had made sure I wasn't going anywhere. I grabbed my laptop and started recording. If this was the end, I wanted someone to know what happened. My voice was shaky as I explained everything: the strange wolves, the symbols, the voices. I showed the footage I'd captured and described the cave and the bones. "They're not just animals," I whispered into the camera. "There's something else, smarter, stronger. They've been watching me, learning from me. And now they're coming." The sun was setting, and I knew I didn't have much time. I packed what I could into a small bagwater, my flashlight, and the hunting knife. If I stayed in the RV, I was a sitting duck. My only chance was to make a run for it, to try and reach the main road miles away. As the last light of day faded, I stepped outside. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the air thick with tension. I forced myself to move, keeping my steps as silent as possible. I didn't make it far. The growls started first, low and menacing, coming from all around me. Then I saw their eyes, dozens of glowing yellow orbs watching me from the darkness. I ran. Branches scratched at my face, and roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. The growls grew louder, closer, and I could hear their heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Then I heard the voice. Rebecca. It was the alpha. Its voice deep and broken, but unmistakably human. "Why run?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, but I knew it was hopeless. They were faster, stronger, and they were toying with me. Something slammed into me from behind, knocking me to the ground. Pain shot through my body as I tried to crawl away, but a massive clawed hand pinned me in place. The alpha leaned down, its face inches from mine. Its breath was hot and rancid, its yellow eyes burning with intelligence. "Stay with us," it growled, its voice almost a whisper. "Learn or die." I screamed and thrashed, but it was no use. I felt sharp claws tear into my legs, and the pain was blinding. My vision blurred as I reached for my bag, fumbling for the flashlight. With the last of my strength, I turned it on and pointed it at the alpha. For a moment, it recoiled, its growl turning into a snarl. But then, it laughed a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the forest. "Light won't save you," it said. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the alpha's face, its twisted grin etched into my mind. When the research team found my RV weeks later, it was empty. They discovered my recordings, the broken cameras, and bloodstains leading into the forest. They never found my body, just pieces of a torn jacket, a shoe, and what they identified as bite marks too large to belong to any known animal. The footage I left behind proved the creatures were real, but it came with a warning. The pack wasn't just hunting me, they were hunting anyone who came looking for the truth. Now they know we're watching, and they're watching back. My name is Jack Morrison. I'm 45 years old, And for most of my life, I've been drawn to mountains like a moth to a flame. The higher, the better. There's something about the silence up there. The air so crisp it feels like it could cut through you. And the sense that the world below just doesn't matter anymore. A few years back, I gave up the noise of the city and moved into a custom RV I built myself. It's nothing fancy, but it's got everything I need to live off the grid. My days are simple. I climb, I explore, and I document. You'd be surprised how many caves there are in the Rocky Mountains that no one's bothered to map or even talk about. That's my thing, finding the forgotten places and giving them a story. On this particular trip, I had my sights set on a stretch of the Rockies that most people avoid. Locals whispered about it, calling it cursed or haunted. But to me, it just sounded like an adventure. I parked my RV at the base of the range, packed my gear, and set out at sunrise. The plan was simple: find unexplored caves, take notes, and come back before dark. The first couple of days went like clockwork. I found a few small caverns with some interesting rock formations, but nothing groundbreaking. Then, on the third day, everything changed. I stumbled upon an opening half hidden by snow and overgrown bushes. It was the kind of place that would be easy to miss unless you were looking for Itant. I was always looking. As I stepped closer, the first thing that hit me was the cold. It wasn't the usual mountain chill. This was deeper, sharper, like the air itself didn't want me there. I felt a strange pull, a mix of curiosity and dread, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. After all, I'd been to plenty of caves before. What was one more? Inside, the light from my headlamp bounced off the walls, revealing strange markings etched into the stone. They weren't like anything I'd seen before: spirals, handprints, and shapes that looked almost human, but not quite. At the back of the cave, I noticed something else: massive footprints, pressed deep into the frozen ground. They were at least 3 times the size of mine, and the toes were clawed. I should have left right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I reached for my camera, my hands shaking as I tried to steady the lens. This wasn't just a cave. This was a story, a big one. It wasn't until later that I realized those markings weren't decorations. They were warnings. I stayed in that cave longer than I should have. The footprints alone were enough to send my mind racing. What could have made them? A bear? No, they were too big. Maybe some kind of prank? But who would come all the way up here just to pull a stunt like this? As I followed the tracks deeper into the cave, the air got colder. My breath turned to fog in front of me, and the sound of my boots crunching on the frozen ground echoed through the space. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me like a weight. I came to a larger chamber, and that's when I saw them paintings on the walls. They were old, way older than anything I'd ever come across before. They showed people, or at least I thought they were people, standing in a circle. In the middle of them was something huge, a creature with long arms, sharp claws, and glowing eyes. The way it was painted made it seem alive, like it was watching me. Beneath the creature, there were smaller figures lying on the ground. At first, I thought they were just resting, but as I looked closer, I realized they weren't resting at all. They were sacrifices. The detail in the paintings made my stomach churn. It wasn't just a story, it felt like a warning. The tracks led straight toward the back of the chamber, where the ground sloped down into darkness. I didn't want to follow, but I felt like I had to. My headlamp barely cut through the thick shadows, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. At the bottom of the slope, I found something that made my blood run cold. There were bodies, frozen in the ice. They were perfectly preserved, their faces locked in expressions of fear and pain. Some of them still had their gear-old climbing tools, jackets from another era. These weren't just stories from some ancient painting. These were real people who had been here before me, people who had never made it out. I started to back away, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But then I heard a low rumble, like the mountain itself was growling. The ground beneath my feet shook, and chunks of ice cracked and shifted around me. I don't know why I didn't run right then. Maybe I thought it was just an avalanche starting somewhere outside, or maybe I was too frozen in place to move. Whatever it was, I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest as the rumble grew loud. And then, just for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the darkness beyond the ice. Something big. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. My headlamp flickered for a moment, casting long shadows across the frozen bodies. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring into the darkness. At first it was silent again, just the sound of my own shaky breaths filling the cave. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send chills down my spine, scraping, like claws dragging across stone. I tried to tell myself it was just the ice shifting, but deep down, I knew better. Something was in there with me. The rumbling grew stronger, and the floor vibrated under my boots. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. My headlamp caught a flash of movement, just a blur, but it was enough to confirm I wasn't alone. I fumbled for my flashlight, desperate for a stronger beam, and pointed it toward the darkness. That's when I saw. It was massive, easily 20 feet tall, crouched in the shadows like it was waiting. Its arms were long, its claws sharp enough to carve through rock. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it shimmered faintly, like the ice itself. But the ice, those were the worst part. They glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, and when they locked onto me, I felt like they could see straight through me. For a moment, neither of us moved. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. This thing wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely, something ancient and dangerous. The creature straightened slowly, its head nearly brushing the ceiling of the chamber. The scraping sound came again as it dragged one of its claws along the wall, carving deep grooves into the rock. And then it roared. The sound wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep and guttural, shaking the air around me and making my chest feel like it was about to collapse. Ice cracked and fell from the walls, and the ground beneath me trembled. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. Anything was better than staying in that cave. My headlamp bounced wildly as I sprinted back up the slope, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, like it wasn't in any hurry to catch me. When I reached the chamber with the paintings, I stumbled and fell, landing hard on the frozen ground. My flashlight skittered away, its beam illuminating the wall again. The creature was painted there, just as it had been before. But now it felt like those glowing eyes were following me, watching my every move. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my flashlight, the rumbling footsteps growing louder. As I bolted out of the cave and into the open air, the storm hit. Snow and wind whipped around me, stinging my face and making it nearly impossible to see. It was as if the mountain itself had come alive, determined to trap me. I staggered forward, my legs screaming in protest. But the storm only grew worse. Somewhere behind me, I could still hear it, the steady, deliberate crunch of footsteps in the snow. It was following me. The storm was relentless. Snow swirled around me, so thick it felt like I was walking blind. My body begged me to stop, but I couldn't, not with that thing following. Every time I paused to catch my breath, I heard Ita faint crunch, the sound of massive footsteps moving closer. I tried to think of a plan, but my mind was scattered. My map was useless in this blizzard, and my compass spun wildly, as if the mountain itself didn't want me to find my way out. The wind howled, carrying strange sounds with itlow growls, distant echoes, the kind of noises that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It felt like the mountain wasn't just alive, but watching me, toying with me. I spotted a cluster of boulders ahead, their dark shapes barely visible through the snow. Desperate for cover, I stumbled toward them, slipping on the ice beneath my boot. The moment I ducked behind the rocks, I felt a sharp chill that seemed to sink straight into my bones. It wasn't just the storm, it was something else. And then I saw the creature stood at the edge of my sight, a towering shadow against the whiteout. Its glowing eyes pierced through the storm, scanning the landscape like it already knew exactly where I was. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it could hear me. I clutched the ice axe strapped to my pack, my only weapon. It felt laughably small, like trying to fend off a bear with a toothpick. Still, I gripped it tightly, my knuckles white against the handle. The creature didn't rush. It didn't need to. It moved slowly, deliberately, its massive claws slicing through the snow as it came close. I watched, frozen with fear, as it bent down and plunged one of its claws into the ground. The earth beneath me groaned, and suddenly, a spear of ice shot up from the ground, just inches from where I was crouched. I scrambled back, the sharp edge slicing through the sleeve of my jacket. It wasn't just following me, it was hunting me. I bolted from the rocks, my legs barely cooperating as I ran blindly into the storm. Ice spears erupted around me, crashing down with terrifying precision. One struck the ground so close that shards of ice sprayed across my face, stinging like tiny needles. I tripped again, this time landing hard on my side. As I struggled to get up, I felt the ground beneath me shift, a sickening lurch that sent me sprawling again. The creature roared, and the sound was deafening, cutting through the storm like a knife. I crawled toward the edge of a ridge, hoping to find some kind of shelter. Instead, I found myself staring down into a massive chasm, its depths hidden by the swirling snow. There was no way forward. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder. It was close now, so close I could feel the vibrations through the ice. I turned, gripping my axe, knowing it was useless but refusing to give up. The creature loomed above me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, it just stood there, watching me. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised one massive claw and pointed to the chasm. It wanted me to jump. My legs shook as I stepped back, my boots skidding dangerously close to the edge. The wind howled, the storm blinding me, but I could still see the creature's eyes, burning like twin suns in the darkness. I didn't want to give it the satisfaction, but I didn't have a choice. If I stayed, I was dead. If I jumped, maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to survive. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and stepped off the edge. The fall wasn't as long as I expected. I hit something solid after a few seconds, the impact knocking the air out of my lungs. I lay there, dazed, staring up at the swirling snow above me. My headlamp flickered weakly, casting just enough light to show that I'd landed on a ledge, partway down the chasm. For a moment, I thought I might be safe. The storm seemed quieter here, the wind muffled by the sheer walls of ice surrounding me. But that hope didn't last long. The rumbling started again, low and deep, like thunder rolling through the ground. I sat up, wincing as pain shot through my side. My pack had cushioned most of the fall, but I could feel a sharp ache in my ribs. I turned my headlamp toward the ledge, trying to figure out where I could go next. That's when I saw a narrow opening in the ice wall, just big enough to crawl through. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting out here, waiting for the creature to find me. I pulled myself up, every muscle screaming in protest, and staggered toward the opening. Inside, the air was colder, biting at my skin even through my layers. The passage sloped downward, leading into what felt like another cave. The walls sparkled faintly, the ice reflecting my weak light. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't felt so wrong. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the deeper I went, the harder it was to breathe. When I reached the end of the passage, I froze. The chamber was massive, its walls shimmering with ice that seemed to glow faintly from within, and scattered throughout were crystal-like formations, each one holding a figure frozen in place. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. They were peoplemen and women, all perfectly preserved in the ice. Their faces were contorted in fear, their eyes wide, as if they'd seen something terrible in their final moments. I stumbled backward, my headlamp sweeping across the chamber. There were dozens of them, maybe more, each one encased in their own frozen prison. Some wore climbing gear, others looked like they'd been here for centuries, their clothing tattered and ancient. And then I saw the last crystal, the one in the center of the chamber. It was empty. Before I could react, the rumbling returned, louder this time. The ground beneath me trembled, and the walls seemed to close in. The air grew even colder, the frost creeping up my boots and numbing my legs. I turned, desperate to escape, but the passage I'd come through was gone, sealed by a thick wall of ice. The creature's roar echoed through the chamber, and I spun around, my headlamp shaking in my hand. It was there, standing at the entrance, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The ice beneath my feet cracked and shifted, and I realized too late that I'd stepped onto a thin sheet covering another drop. The floor gave way, and I plunged into darkness. When I hit the bottom, the cold was like nothing I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just outside, it felt like it was inside me, seeping into my bones. I lay there, gasping for air, my body too numb to move. The light from my headlamp flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the ice walls around me. I tried to push myself up, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. The rumbling returned. Now, so close it felt like it was coming from inside my chest. I turned my head, forcing my eyes to focus, and that's when I saw it. The creature was standing over me, its massive form blocking out what little light there was. Its glowing eyes bore into mine, unblinking and cold. For a moment, it just stood there, as if studying me, deciding what to do next. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body refused to listen. The cold had taken over, locking me in place. All I could do was watch as the creature reached down, its claws moving with surprising precision. It touched the ice beneath me, and immediately, I felt its Spredinga thin layer of frost creeping up my body, inch by inch. My breath hitched as the freezing sensation tightened around my chest. I could feel the ice hardening, locking me in place, trapping me. Panic surged through me, but there was nothing I could do. My fingers twitched weakly, but the rest of my body was already encased. The creature stepped back, tilting its head as if admiring its work. Around me, the chamber seemed to glow brighter, the crystals reflecting the light from my headlamp. I realized, with growing horror, that I was becoming one of them, another figure frozen in the ice, another warning to whoever might come after me. My face was the last part to freeze. The cold crept up my neck, numbing my jaw, my cheeks, my nose. I wanted to cry, but even my tears froze before they could fall. My vision blurred as the ice closed over my eyes, and for a moment, everything went dark. But then, something strange happened. I could still think. I could still feel. I was aware, trapped in my own body, unable to move or speak or scream. The world around me was silent, except for the faint hum of the ice. The creature moved to the center of the chamber, where the empty crystal had been. It crouched down, folding itself into a position that almost looked restful. And then, slowly, it became still, its body blending into the ice like it had never been alive at all. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Hours? Days? Years? All I know is that I'm still here, trapped in the ice, my mind wide awake while my body remains frozen. And I know this. The creature isn't gone, it's waiting, just like me, waiting for the next person to come. My name is Thomas Walker. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent the last year living alone in a luxury RV. Not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. My wife Claire died in a car accident last year, and since then, nothing has felt real. I sold the house, packed up what little I cared about, and drove into the middle of nowhere. Now, I call Death Valley home. There's something comforting about the vast emptiness. The endless sand dunes and the baking heat make it impossible for anyone to find me. That's what I wanted, no people, no questions, just silence. But lately, the silence has been broken. It started small, almost like the desert was playing tricks on me. One morning, while hiking to clear my mind, I found something strange lying in the sand. It looked like a rolled-up suit of skin. At first, I thought it was a snake that had shed its skin, but when I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was human. The skin was pale, too perfect to be real. No blood, no damage, just a flawless human shell, like someone had peeled it off in one perfect piece. I stared at it for a long time, unsure of what to do. Should I call someone? But who would I call? What would I even say? In the end, I left it there and walked back to my RV. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Maybe it was some kind of prank or art project. People do weird things, even out here. But the next day, I found another one. This time, it was closer to my RV, lying flat on the ground like it had been dropped there. It looked different from the first one. This one was older, wrinkled, like it belonged to a much older person. The sight of it made my stomach turn. I couldn't ignore it anymore. As I picked it up with a stick, I noticed something else. The skin had no weight, no substance. It was as if it were made of paper. And yet, the detail was too real to be fake. Veins, pores, even tiny scarsol of it was there. I threw it away as far as I could and hurried back inside. That night, I locked all the doors and shut every curtain in the RV. But the desert wasn't done with me. During a dust storm a few nights later, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was Claire's voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The wind can play tricks on your ears, right? But then I heard it again, clear as day. "Thomas, come outside." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the locked door. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing games, but it sounded so real, so much like her. "Thomas," the voice called again, softer this time. I stayed inside, gripping a flashlight like it was a weapon. The voice didn't call again that night, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I noticed something outside the RV window. At first glance, it looked like my own reflection in the glass, but when I moved, the figure didn't. It was a man, standing perfectly still, staring at me. It wasn't my reflection. I stepped outside cautiously, but by the time I got out, there was no one there, only the endless sand stretching out in every direction. I told myself I was just tired. The desert can do that to you. I wasn't crazy. It was just stress, loneliness, and grief messing with my head. That's all it was. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something was out there, and it was watching me. This was only the beginning. I didn't leave the RV much after that. Every time I thought about going outside, I felt this heavy weight in my chest, like something bad was waiting for me. For a while, I stayed busy inside, fixing little things around the RV, organizing cupboards, or just lying on the couch staring at the ceiling. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then it happened. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the sun hangs low, making everything glow orange. I decided to sit outside, just for a few minutes, to remind myself that I wasn't scared of some imaginary boogeyman. I pulled out a folding chair and sat in the shade of the RV, sipping water and trying to enjoy the quiet. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a shadow on the sand dunes, a ripple in the air. I squinted, thinking maybe the heat was playing tricks on my eyes. But then the shadow moved. It wasn't just Movenjit was copying me. I shifted in my chair, leaning to one side. The shadow leaned the same way. I raised my arm to scratch my head, and it did too. My heart started racing. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down I knew better. I stood up, and so did the figure. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer. It just stood there, motionless now, like it was waiting for me to do something. I took a step forward, and so did it. That's when I realized it wasn't just a shadow, it had a shape, a human shape. I turned and bolted back inside the RV, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the latch. I peeked through the curtains, but there was nothing there anymore. Just sand and sunlight. That night I didn't sleep again. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, thinking maybe I should just leave. But where would I go? I'd come out here to escape people, to be alone. Now I was too scared to even step outside. The next morning, I forced myself to go out and check around the RV. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Grief does weird things to your mind. But as I circled the RV, I found footprints in the sand. They weren't mine. The prints were bigger than my boots, deep and deliberate, leading around the RV like someone had been pacing all night. My throat felt tight as I followed them, stopping when I saw where they ended right in front of the door. Whoever, or whatever, had been out there had been standing just inches away from me. That's when I noticed something else. On the RV's window, there was a smudge, like someone had pressed their face against the glass. I leaned closer, heart pounding, and froze. It wasn't just any face, it was mine. I stumbled back, my pulse roaring in my ears. There was no way this was real. Maybe the heat was getting to me. Maybe I'd been in the desert too long. But then I remembered the skin I'd found in the sand. The voice in the storm. And I knew this wasn't in my head. Something was out there, and it was coming for me. The smudge on the window stayed there all day, no matter how hard I scrubbed. It was like it didn't want to come off, like a warning left just for me. I spent most of the day inside, pacing back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. My gut told me to leave, but I wasn't ready. Running felt like admitting I was scared, and I didn't want to give whatever this was that kind of power over me. By late afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Staying locked inside wasn't helping, and maybe, just maybe, I could find something that would explain what was happening. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the dunes. The desert stretched out forever, the sun beating down on my back as I walked. The wind was quiet that day, almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. About a mile from the RV, I saw something sticking out of the sand. At first, I thought it was just a pile of old clothes, but as I got closer, my stomach turned. It wasn't clothes, it was another skin. This one was different from the others I'd found. It wasn't just a flat, empty shell, it was posed. The body was curled up on its side, like whoever it belonged to had been trying to hide from something. The details were horrifying. The fingers were bent like they'd been clawing at the ground. The face, what was left of it, had an expression of pure terror frozen in place. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. It looked so real, so human. But there was no blood, no sign of struggle, just this hollow thing left behind. My breathing was shaky as I turned away, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed something in the distance. It was hard to make out at first, just a blur on the horizon. But as I squinted, I realized it was a figure. It was standing perfectly still, too far away to make out any details. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was just another mirage. But then it moved. It didn't walk or run. It just shifted, like it had taken a step closer without actually stepping. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I turned and ran back toward the RV, not daring to look over my shoulder. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. For the next hour, I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the door, listening. The desert was silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. But then the RV shook. It wasn't a hard shake, just a small tremble, like something had bumped against it. I held my breath, gripping the flashlight tightly. Another tremble, this time stronger. And then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across metal. It started at the back of the RV and slowly moved toward the front. When it reached the door, the scraping stopped. I don't know how long I sat there, waiting, but eventually, the silence returned. The next morning, I found the marks. Deep, uneven scratches ran along the sides of the RV, as if something had been circling it all night. But the worst part? There were faces in the windows. Not reflections, not shadow-sexual faces, pressed against the glass, staring in. I recognized some of them. They were the faces of the skins I'd found. I don't know how long I stared at them, frozen in place, but when I blinked, they were gone. The desert wasn't just playing tricks on me anymore. It was trying to pull me in. The faces haunted me all day. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something real. By now, I knew I wasn't safe, even inside the RV, but I still couldn't bring myself to leave. It felt like the desert was daring me to run, like whatever was out there would follow me no matter where I went. The sun was setting when I first heard the noisy, faint tapping at the back of the RV. It was soft, almost like rain, but the sky was clear. I froze, holding my breath, hoping it was just the wind. But then it came again, louder this time. A steady, deliberate knock, knock, knock. Gripping my flashlight, I crept toward the back window, my heart pounding in my ears. When I peeked through the curtain, I didn't see anything at first, just the sand glowing orange in the fading sunlight. And then I saw it. A figure stood just outside the RV, still as a statue. It looked human at first, broad shoulders, long legs, but something was off. Its skin didn't look right, like it was stretched too tightly over its bones. I backed away from the window, my chest tightening. I didn't know what to do. Call for help? Who would believe me? Grab a weapon? What could I possibly fight this thing with? Thomas, a voice called. I nearly dropped the flashlight. Thomas, it's me. The voice was soft, familiar. Claire. Thomas, please, she said again. I need you. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door. My hand reached for the lock before I could stop myself. But something in the back of my mind told me to wait. The voice came again, louder this time. Thomas, it hurts. Please, help me. Tears blurred my vision as I leaned against the door. It sounded so much like her, like Claire was just outside waiting for me. But then I remembered the faces in the windows, the skins in the sand. No, I whispered to myself. This isn't real. The voice changed, turning deeper, colder. Thomas. The sound sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't Claire anymore. It wasn't even human. I backed away from the door, gripping the flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then the door rattled. I stumbled back, watching as the lock turned slowly, almost like an invisible hand was twisting it. I ran to grab a kitchen knife, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I turned back, the door was open, and it was standing there. The creature was taller than I'd thought, its head nearly brushing the top of the doorway. Its skin looked wrong, like it had been sewn together from different pieces. The eyes were the worst part, empty and black, reflecting nothing but my own fear. It didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me, and then, slowly, it raised its hand. I gasped. The hand wasn't its own. It was mine. It was wearing my skin. I stumbled back, choking on a scream as the thing stepped inside. It didn't rush me, didn't attack. It just stared, tilting its head like it was studying me. Then it spoke, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Thomas? It said. Its voice a perfect copy of mine. Why are you afraid? The knife slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I couldn't breathe. My knees felt weak, and my body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. The thing took another step forward, and I saw the way its skin shifted, like it didn't fit right. Patches of it sagged in places, while other parts stretched tight over bone. It was wearing me. My face, my hands, my skin. Thomas, it said again, still in my voice, but the words didn't match the way its mouth moved. The sound came from deep inside it, echoing like a bad recording. Don't be scared. I just want to know you. I stumbled back, tripping over the couch and falling hard onto the floor. My flashlight rolled away, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the creature. It crouched down, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was trying not to scare me. but its black, empty eyes stayed locked on mine. "Do you miss her?" it asked suddenly. My blood ran cold. "What?" I managed to whisper. "Your wife." Its head tilted, the way a dog does when it's curious. "You miss her, don't you?" I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing up, and all I could do was nod. It smiled. Or at least it tried to. The expression stretched my stolen skin in unnatural ways, splitting it at the edges. Beneath the cracks, I could see something dark and raw, like meat. "I can bring her back," it said, its voice shifting into hers. Claire's voice. "No," I croaked, shaking my head. "You're lying." It straightened up, towering over me now. "I can give you what you want," it said, ignoring me. "You don't have to be alone anymore." For a moment, the RV shifted around me. The walls faded, and suddenly, I wasn't in the desert anymore. I was back home, sitting on the couch with Claire. She was laughing at something I'd said, her head resting on my shoulder. It felt so real. Her warmth, the sound of her voice was like she'd never left. "Thomas," she said, looking up at me with those soft, familiar eyes, "you can stay here, with me." But something was wrong. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and when she touched my hand, her skin felt cold. I blinked, and the illusion shattered. The RV came back into focus, and the thing was standing over me again, watching. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice breaking. Its head tilted again. "Why? You're not her," I said, forcing myself to my feet. "You'll never be her." The smile disappeared, and its voice changed, dropping into something guttural and low. "I don't need to be her," it growled. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I scrambled backward, grabbing the first thing I could find, a frying pan, and swung it as hard as I could. The sound was sickening, like hitting a wet bag of meat. The thing staggered back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it straightened up, and I saw the damage I'd done. The skin on its head had peeled back, revealing something dark and writhing underneath. It wasn't muscle or bone, it was something else entirely, something alive. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I grabbed the knife I'd dropped earlier and ran for the door. The desert air hit me like a wave, hot and dry, but I didn't stop. I sprinted toward the dunes, my legs burning with every step. Behind me, I could hear it following, its heavy footsteps crunching in the sand. "Thomas," it roared, its voice a horrible mix of mine and Claire's. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But as I reached the top of the nearest dune, I made the mistake of glancing over my shoulder. It wasn't just following me. There were more of them. At least a dozen figures were climbing out of the sand, their hollowed bodies twisting and snapping as they stood. They all had different skins, stitched together like patchwork, and their empty eyes were locked on me. I was surrounded. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were stuck in the sand as the figures closed in. Their patchwork bodies jerked unnaturally, as if they weren't used to walking. Every step they took sounded like dry paper being crumpled. The thing wearing my skin was leading them, its black eyes locked on me. It didn't rush. It didn't have to. "Thomas," it called, its voice calm now, almost soothing. "There's nowhere to run." My breath was shallow, my chest tightening as I realized it was right. Even if I ran, where would I go? The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Gripping the knife tightly in my hand, I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on them. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything, that could get me out of this. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking. They didn't stop. The hollowed bodies moved closer, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. I recognized some of them now, faces I'd seen in the windows of the RV. My foot hit something hard and I stumbled, nearly falling. When I looked down, my heart sank. It was another skin, lying crumpled in the sand like a discarded suit. The sight made me gag, but it also gave me an idea. It was insane, but it might be the only chance I had. I grabbed the empty skin, the dry material crackling in my hands. It was lighter than I expected, almost weightless, like thin leather. Holding my breath, I draped it over myself, pulling it over my shoulders like a cloak. It was disgusting. The inside was cold and slimy, and the smell was overwhelming like rotting meat left out in the sun. But I didn't have time to think about that. The figures stopped. For a moment, they just stood there, their heads tilting in unison as if they were confused. Then slowly, they began to back away. It was working. I adjusted the skin, trying to cover as much of myself as possible. The thing wearing my face hesitated, its black eyes narrowing. "Thomas," it said, its voice sharp now. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stood tall, mimicking the jerky, unnatural movements of the other figures. The creature stepped closer, its stolen skin shifting as it moved. "You can't hide from me," it hissed. My heart pounded as I took a step back, trying to keep my distance. But the thing was faster. It lunged at me, its long fingers clawing at the skin I was wearing. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as the creature ripped the skin away, exposing me. "You don't belong here," it roared, its voice shaking the air. I swung the knife wildly, managing to slash across its chest. The skin peeled away, revealing more of the writhing darkness underneath. The creature shrieked, a sound so loud and piercing it felt like it was rattling my bones. The other figures stopped retreating. Slowly, they turned back toward me, their hollow faces twisting into expressions of rage. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, the knife still clenched in my hand. Behind me, I could hear the creatures following, their footsteps pounding in the sand. The dune seemed endless, each one looking the same as the last. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were about to give out, but I couldn't stop. Finally, I saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the heat waves, was an old rusted water tower. It wasn't much, but it was something solid, something real. I sprinted toward it, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. When I reached the base, I scrambled up the ladder, my hands slipping on the rusted rungs. The creatures gathered below, their black eyes watching me as I climbed. They didn't try to follow. Instead, they stood in a circle around the water tower, their bodies swaying like they were caught in some invisible wind. At the top, I collapsed onto the platform, gasping for air. For a moment, I felt safe. The creatures couldn't climb. They couldn't reach me here. But then the thing wearing my skin stepped forward. It raised its arms, and the other figures followed, their heads tilting back as one. And then they screamed. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A deep, guttural wail that seemed to shake the earth itself. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the sky splitting open, the creatures dissolving into shadows, and the thing wearing my face smiling up at me.